The Mustang showed up alone at the police station, neighing desperately. When the officers followed him, they couldn't believe what they saw inside the cabin. The frost-covered meadows of Haven Springs reflected the first light of dawn, casting long shadows across the rolling hills of Colorado. Esperanza Ramirez pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders, her breath forming small clouds in the bitter morning air. At 19, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had survived far more than her years suggested. She stood at the bus stop, stamping her feet occasionally to keep warm. Her hands, already rough from labor, clutched a simple lunch pail containing tortillas and beans, the food that would sustain her through another day of backbreaking work at the stables. Her dark eyes lifted to the mountains looming in the distance, their peaks gilded with early sunlight while the valleys remained shrouded in shadow. 7 years had passed since her parents died trying to cross the desert at the border. 7 years of living as a ghost in the homes of distant aunts, never truly belonging, always aware that her presence was a burden to be tolerated rather than welcomed. Now she was on her own, taking whatever work she could find without papers, which usually meant jobs no one else wanted, for pay well below standard. The ancient bus arrived with a wheeze of brakes and a cloud of exhaust that hung in the frigid air. Esperanza climbed aboard, nodding silently to the driver who barely acknowledged her presence. She chose a seat near the back, away from the curious glances of the other passengers, mostly ranch hands and service workers heading to properties scattered across the valley. 20 minutes later, the bus groaned to a stop at the edge of an immaculate white fence stretching as far as the eye could see. The sign above the gate read, "Thornton Ranch," in ornate iron lettering. Esperanza descended the steps, her eyes taking in the sprawling property, a monument to wealth with its perfectly maintained pastures, gleaming white fences, and stables that looked more luxurious than most houses in town. Richard Thornton, oil magnate and breeder of award-winning racehorses, was known as much for his elite animals as for his explosive temper. Esperanza had heard stories from other workers about both. She walked briskly toward the main stables, her breath forming rhythmic clouds in the air. Before she could reach the entrance, a stocky man with a weathered face and clipboard intercepted her. "You're late," growled Mike Peterson, the foreman, consulting his watch with exaggerated attention. "Mr. Thornton doesn't tolerate tardiness, especially from, well, people like you." Esperanza lowered her gaze, a practiced gesture of deference she had perfected over years of navigating hostile environments. "The bus was delayed because of the snow, senor." "Whatever. Clean the stalls in the main stable first, then move to the north stable. We have a new problem there." He looked her up and down, his expression making it clear he considered her barely more qualified than the animals she tended. "Si, senor," she replied, already moving toward the equipment shed to collect a shovel and wheelbarrow. The work was exhausting but familiar. Esperanza moved methodically from stall to stall, removing soiled hay, scrubbing water troughs, and laying fresh bedding. The horses, magnificent creatures worth more than she would see in a lifetime, watched her with varying degrees of interest. Some extended their necks for a gentle touch, which she provided when no one was looking. As she worked, she overheard fragments of conversation between riders and handlers who passed through the stable. "Demon, that's what he is," said a gray-bearded trainer to a younger man in expensive riding gear. "Already sent 3 men to the hospital. Thornton only bought him because he's obsessed with owning what nobody else can tame." "They'll put him down at the end of the month if no one can ride him," replied the other. "Shame, magnificent animal. Wild Mustang, black as midnight, caught in the wilderness of Wyoming. Should have left him there." The older man continued, his voice fading as they walked away. Esperanza tried not to listen, focusing instead on her work, but something about their words troubled her deeply. Her grandfather Manuel had been a horse whisperer in Sonora, Mexico, famous for his ability to calm the most difficult equines. Before he died, he had taught young Esperanza that horses were not creatures of violence. They were animals of instinct, responding to fear with more fear. "El caballo no tiene maldad, mijita," he would say, his voice gentle as he guided her small hand along a horse's flank. "Solo tiene memoria y miedo." The horse has no malice, my child, only memory and fear. By evening, when she had finished her tasks in the main stable, Esperanza felt an irresistible curiosity. Instead of heading to the bus stop, she walked toward the north stable. The building stood apart from the others, its weathered wood suggesting it was older than the gleaming main facilities. The place was silent and poorly lit. Esperanza moved quietly, following the row of stalls until she reached the last one, isolated from the other animals. And there he was. The black Mustang was a vision of wild beauty and primal power. Taller than the domesticated horses, his ebony coat gleamed even in the dim light. Old scars marked his flank. Some appeared to be from fights with other stallions, others clearly made by humans. The animal thrashed violently against the ropes that kept him tethered, his eyes wide with panic. Esperanza froze, transfixed by what she saw in those eyes. It wasn't anger. It was pure terror. A terror she intimately recognized. The same she had felt on nights in the immigrant detention center, when she would wake up screaming from nightmares about the desert and her parents' bodies. "They took you from your home too, didn't they?" she whispered in Spanish, her voice barely audible above the sound of the horse's movements. The Mustang paused for an instant, his ears moving toward the sound of her voice. His eyes, previously unfocused in panic, fixed on her with disturbing intensity. Esperanza didn't approach the bars. Instead, she sat down on the concrete floor several feet away, taking a small package of tortillas from her pocket. "My grandfather said we should introduce ourselves first," she said softly. "My name is Esperanza. It means hope, although I don't always have much of that." The Mustang snorted and pawed at the ground, but his movements had lost some of their previous violence. He seemed to be listening. She began to hum softly, an ancient Navajo song she had learned from an elderly woman at the immigrant shelter where she had lived for a time. The melody was as gentle as wind in the mountains, speaking of free spirits and vast prairies. For almost an hour, Esperanza simply sat there, occasionally singing, eating her tortillas, making no movement toward the animal. The stable around them settled into night sounds, distant whinnies, the rustle of hay, the soft thud of hooves on bedding. When she finally stood to leave, she noticed something extraordinary. The Mustang had completely stopped thrashing. Instead, he was watching her with an almost human curiosity, his ears pointed forward in what her grandfather had always described as attention, not aggression. "I'll come back tomorrow, Libertad," she whispered. She didn't know why she had called the horse that, Freedom. But the name seemed fitting for a spirit as untamed as her own. The Mustang's nostrils flared as if taking in her scent one last time before she departed. As Esperanza slipped out of the stable into the cold night, she didn't notice the figure standing in the shadows by the tack room. Sarah Littlefeather, the Cherokee veterinarian employed by the ranch, remained perfectly still, her trained eyes wide with astonishment at what she had just witnessed. The vet had come to check on the new arrival after hearing about the day's failed attempts to approach him. She had expected to find the Mustang in the same state of violent panic reported by the handlers. Instead, she had arrived just in time to see a young Mexican woman sitting calmly near the stall of the most dangerous horse on the property, singing to him as if they were old friends. Sarah remained in the shadows, a silent witness to something that defied everything she had seen in years of working with horses, a connection forming between two broken spirits that recognized something essential in each other, something beyond words or rational explanation. As Esperanza disappeared into the night, Sarah looked back at the black Mustang. For the first time since his arrival, the animal stood quietly in his stall, his eyes fixed on the doorway where the girl had vanished, his ears still pointed forward in that expression of curious attention. Sarah shook her head in wonder. In 15 years as an equine veterinarian, she had never seen anything quite like it. The Mustang that had been deemed impossible to approach had just spent an hour in peaceful company with a slip of a girl who spoke to him as an equal. She made a mental note to learn more about this mysterious young woman who seemed to speak a language that transcended the barriers between species. A language of shared pain and, perhaps, shared healing. Sarah Littlefeather stood motionless in the early morning light filtering through the stable windows, her breath forming small clouds in the chilly air. She couldn't stop thinking about what she had witnessed the previous night, something that challenged her 15 years of veterinary experience. The wild Mustang that had been deemed too dangerous to approach had spent an entire hour in peaceful company with a young Mexican stable hand. Sarah moved methodically through the stables, checking on the pregnant mare in stall 14 while keeping one eye on the entrance. When the door finally creaked open and Esperanza slipped inside, Sarah pretended to be absorbed in her clipboard notes. Esperanza arrived earlier than required, the sky outside still painted in pre-dawn purples and blues. She glanced nervously around before making her way toward the north stable, unaware of Sarah's watchful eyes. In her hand was a worn book, its spine cracked from years of use. "You're here early," Sarah finally said, stepping out from behind a stall door. Esperanza froze, her eyes widening with alarm. "I just wanted to finish yesterday's work, Señora. I did not complete—" "It's okay," Sarah interrupted gently. "I saw you last night, with the Mustang." Color drained from Esperanza's face. "I am sorry. I know I shouldn't have—" "I'm not here to report you," Sarah assured her, lowering her voice. "I'm curious. That horse hasn't let anyone near him without trying to kill them. Yet there you were, sitting a few feet away while he watched you like you were having a conversation." Esperanza's shoulders relaxed slightly, though wariness remained in her eyes. "My grandfather said horses speak in silence. We just need to learn to listen." Sarah studied the young woman, noting the intelligence behind her cautious demeanor. "What's your name?" "Esperanza Ramirez. I'm Dr. Sarah Littlefeather, the veterinarian." She extended her hand, which Esperanza shook after a moment's hesitation. "What were you planning to do this morning?" Esperanza lifted the tattered book in her hand. "Just sit with him. Read sometimes. My abuelo said a scared horse needs to know you're not a threat before anything else." Sarah nodded slowly. "Go ahead. I won't stop you. But I'd like to observe if that's okay, from a distance." Esperanza considered this, then nodded once before continuing toward the north stable. The black Mustang was already alert when they entered, his ears pricked forward at the sound of footsteps. When he saw Esperanza, his nostrils flared, taking in her scent. His posture remained tense but lacked the violent thrashing of the previous days. Esperanza settled onto the concrete floor in the same spot as before, opening her book while maintaining a respectful distance from the stall. Sarah positioned herself on a hay bale across the aisle, fascinated as the young woman began to read aloud in Spanish from what appeared to be an old book about wild horses of the Americas. "Listen to how they describe your ancestors," Esperanza said softly to the Mustang. "Spirits of freedom, carrying the wind in their manes, their hooves barely touching the earth as they gallop across the endless plains." For 30 minutes, she simply read, her voice a gentle cadence in the quiet stable. The Mustang's attention remained fixed on her, his powerful body gradually relaxing into stillness. When other stable hands began to arrive for the morning shift, their loud voices and clanging equipment shattered the peaceful atmosphere. The Mustang immediately tensed, retreating to the back of his stall with wild eyes. "Es normal," Esperanza whispered to him before closing her book and standing. "Tomorrow we continue." Sarah caught up with her outside. "That was remarkable. How did you learn to do this?" Esperanza shrugged. "My grandfather was curandero de caballos in Sonora. He showed me that patience matters more than force." "Your grandfather was right," Sarah replied thoughtfully. Throughout the following days, Sarah observed as Esperanza established a quiet routine. The young woman would arrive early, spend time sitting near Libertad's stall, and return during her lunch break. She never attempted to approach the Mustang, never reached toward him, simply existed in the same space with infinite patience. Word spread among the stable hands, creating a divide in opinions. Some workers gathered during breaks to peer through the stable doors, snickering among themselves. "La Bruja and her demon horse," one groom whispered to another. She's casting Mexican spells on it." Others watched with genuine curiosity, especially Carlos, an elderly Mexican gardener who started leaving apples near Esperanza's usual path. "Para el caballo," he told her with a wink. "My father also had the gift." 1 week into this routine, Esperanza arrived with something new, an old guitar borrowed from Carlos. The instrument was badly out of tune with 2 strings missing, but she sat cross-legged on the ground and began to play anyway, her fingers coaxing gentle melodies from the damaged instrument. "In music we are free," she told Libertad while playing. "It doesn't matter where we come from or what they did to us." Sarah, watching from her now regular observation post, noticed something extraordinary. The Mustang, who still reacted violently to other humans, had begun to show distinct periods of calm during Esperanza's visits. The animal would stand at the front of his stall, ears forward, muscles relaxed, as if absorbing every note. The stable manager noticed too. During the 3rd week, Mike Peterson confronted Esperanza as she was leaving the north stable, guitar in hand. "What exactly do you think you're doing with that horse?" he demanded, blocking her path. Esperanza lowered her gaze. "Just cleaning around the stall, senor." "With a guitar?" He pointed to the instrument poorly hidden behind her back. "Look, girl, that animal is worth more money than you'll see in your lifetime. If he hurts you, you'll be deported before you even reach the hospital. Understand?" "Yes, senor," Esperanza replied quietly. "Get back to the main stable. That's where you belong." Peterson stalked away, his displeasure evident in every step. Sarah approached once he was gone. "Don't let him discourage you. What you're doing, it's working." The next day, despite Peterson's warning, Esperanza was back. This time she brought an apple, cutting it into pieces and placing one in her open palm. She sat 2 meters from the bars, arm extended. "No hay prisa, Libertad," she murmured. "There is no hurry." For nearly an hour she remained perfectly still, the apple slice resting on her palm. The Mustang watched her intently, nostrils flaring, occasionally taking a step forward before retreating again. Sarah documented everything in her notebook, noting the horse's body language, his eye movements, the gradual softening of his posture. She had witnessed traditional breaking methods her entire career, the ropes, the restraints, the submission through exhaustion. This was something entirely different, something that honored the animal's intelligence and agency. It was during the 3rd week that the impossible happened. Esperanza was playing a traditional Mexican lullaby, her voice blending with the simple guitar chords in the hushed stable. The melody spoke of stars watching over sleeping children, of guardian angels keeping nightmares at bay. Libertad stood at the front of his stall, utterly still. Then, with deliberate slowness, he extended his powerful neck through the bars. Esperanza continued singing, making no sudden movements. The Mustang's muzzle approached her shoulder, and for the briefest moment, touched it gently before withdrawing. Esperanza froze, silent tears streaming down her face. The touch had lasted only seconds, but represented a miracle for anyone who understood the behavior of traumatized wild Mustangs. "Did you see that?" Sarah's voice came from behind her, thick with emotion. "That horse hasn't let anyone approach without trying to kill them. He just needs time and respect," Esperanza replied, quickly wiping away her tears. "What do you know about horses?" Sarah asked, not condescendingly but with genuine curiosity. "Mi abuelo. My grandfather was curandero de caballos in Sonora. He said when a horse is frightened, showing more fear or force only makes it worse. We must show that we understand their pain." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I've been watching you. I've never seen anything like this before." News about the strange connection between the young immigrant and the untamable Mustang spread rapidly through the ranch. Grooms and exercise riders would find excuses to pass by the north stable during Esperanza's visits. Even some of the regular stable hands who had initially mocked her began watching with reluctant admiration. The breakthrough with the apple came a few days later. Esperanza sat in her usual spot, palm extended with a slice of fruit. After nearly 40 minutes of stillness, Libertad finally stretched his neck through the bars and delicately took the apple from her hand, his lips carefully avoiding contact with her skin, a deliberate gentleness that spoke volumes about his growing trust. Sarah captured the moment with her phone camera, her scientific documentation increasingly blended with genuine emotion as she witnessed the developing relationship. "He's choosing to trust you," she told Esperanza afterward. "Do you understand how extraordinary that is? This animal was captured violently, transported in terror, and has experienced nothing but fear and aggression from humans. Yet somehow he's finding a way to trust again." Esperanza nodded, her eyes never leaving the Mustang. "Because he knows I see him, not as property, not as a demon, just as libertad." More workers began finding reasons to linger near the North Stable during Esperanza's sessions. Carlos would bring his lunch to eat nearby, nodding appreciatively at the guitar melodies. Two young Mexican stable hands started asking Esperanza quiet questions about her methods, their initial skepticism giving way to respect. Even some of the professional trainers took notice, though they'd never admit it openly. Sarah overheard them discussing the Mexican girl's witch tricks with grudging fascination. The news about the extraordinary connection eventually reached beyond the stable hands. On a crisp October morning, the stable door swung open to reveal Richard Thornton himself, impeccably dressed in an expensive leather coat, his cold eyes surveying the scene before him. "So you're the girl who thinks she can tame my Mustang," he said, his frosty voice echoing in the stable. Tall and imposing, Thornton was the embodiment of American power and privilege. Esperanza quickly stood. "No, senor. I am not trying to tame him." "Then what the hell are you doing with my $50,000 investment?" "Just talking to him." Thornton laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Talking with a horse." He turned to Mike Peterson, who accompanied him. "An undocumented immigrant has no business with a thoroughbred worth more than she would earn in 10 lifetimes. I want her off my property today." Sarah Littlefeather, who was examining another horse nearby, intervened. "Mr. Thornton, with all due respect, this is the only time your investment isn't trying to destroy everything around him. Observe." Everyone looked at Libertad, who would normally react violently to the presence of strangers. The Mustang was agitated, but kept his eyes fixed on Esperanza, ignoring the men. "Fascinating," Thornton muttered after a moment of observation. "How much do you charge per hour, girl?" "Perdón? To work with this horse, how much do you want?" Esperanza blinked in confusion. "I don't charge anything, senor. I just want to help him." "Everyone has a price." Thornton pulled a wad of bills from his pocket. $300 a week, in addition to your regular salary. But I want results. The Kentucky Derby is coming, and if this animal has the talent I believe it has, it needs to be ready. After Thornton's departure, Sarah approached Esperanza. "You know he expects you to break this horse for racing, right?" "Libertad will never be a racehorse," Esperanza responded calmly. "He is a free spirit." "Libertad? You named him?" "Names have power. Those who call him demon only see what they fear." News about the strange connection between the young immigrant and the untamable Mustang soon reached the ears of Richard Thornton. On a brisk morning when frost still clung to the pasture grass, the ranch owner's gleaming black SUV pulled up to the stables. Esperanza was sitting near Libertad's stall, softly playing her borrowed guitar when the heavy door swung open. "So you're the girl who thinks she can tame my Mustang," Thornton said, his voice echoing in the quiet stable. Tall and imposing in his expensive leather coat, the oil magnate surveyed the scene with cold calculation in his eyes. Esperanza quickly got to her feet, the guitar hanging awkwardly at her side. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she lowered her gaze respectfully. "No, senor, I am not trying to tame him." "Then what the hell are you doing with my $50,000 investment?" Thornton's voice carried the easy confidence of a man accustomed to owning everything within his sight. "Just talking to him," Esperanza replied softly. Thornton laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Talking with a horse." He turned to Mike Peterson, who stood at his shoulder like a faithful shadow. "An undocumented immigrant has no business with a thoroughbred worth more than she would earn in 10 lifetimes. I want her off my property today." Libertad shifted in his stall, ears pinned back at the harsh tone in Thornton's voice. The Mustang's muscles tensed visibly beneath his black coat, his eyes fixed warily on the unfamiliar men. His nostrils flared, taking in their scents, cologne, leather, and something else that made him retreat a step, the smell of dominance and threat. Sarah Littlefeather, who had been examining another horse nearby, moved toward them with purposeful strides. "Mr. Thornton, with all due respect, this is the only time your investment isn't trying to destroy everything around him. Observe." All eyes turned to Libertad, where the Mustang would normally react violently to strangers, kicking at the stall and baring his teeth. He now stood with focused attention, eyes locked on Esperanza. Though clearly agitated by the men's presence, he seemed to be taking his cues from the young woman's calm demeanor. "Fascinating," Thornton muttered after a moment of observation. His businessman's mind quickly recalculated the situation, seeing potential profit where before he had only seen an inconvenience. "How much do you charge per hour, girl?" Esperanza blinked, confused by the sudden shift. "Perdón?" "To work with this horse. How much do you want?" "I don't charge anything, senor. I just want to help him." Thornton's thin lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Everyone has a price." He pulled a wad of bills from his pocket with practiced ease. "300 a week in addition to your regular salary. But I want results. The Kentucky Derby is coming, and if this animal has the talent I believe it has, it needs to be ready." Libertad snorted loudly, pawing at the ground as if understanding the implications of Thornton's words. The Mustang's eyes showed a flash of the old wildness, a reminder that beneath his newfound calm lay an untamed spirit that had roamed free across the high plains. After Thornton strode out, followed closely by Peterson, who shot Esperanza a warning glance, Sarah approached her. The veterinarian's face was etched with concern as she watched Esperanza attempting to calm the now agitated Mustang. "You know he expects you to break this horse for racing, right?" Sarah's voice was gentle but serious. "Libertad will never be a racehorse," Esperanza responded quietly, returning to her spot near the stall. She began to strum a gentle melody that seemed to ease some of the tension from the Mustang's powerful body. "He is a free spirit. Libertad, you named him." Sarah leaned against the opposite wall, watching the interaction with professional interest. Names have power. Those who call him Demon only see what they fear. Esperanza's fingers continued their dance across the guitar strings, the music filling the space between human and horse like a bridge. Over the next several days, word spread throughout Haven Springs about the strange phenomenon occurring at the Thornton Ranch. The young Mexican immigrant who could communicate with the untamable Mustang became something of a local legend, discussed in hushed tones at the diner and the hardware store. People began finding reasons to visit the ranch. A farrier lingered long after finishing his work. A feed supplier made deliveries personally rather than sending his workers. A local high school teacher asked permission to bring her equine management students for an educational observation. Thornton, ever aware of potential publicity, allowed these visits with careful management. Esperanza found herself working with Libertad under increasingly watchful eyes, the pressure to produce results growing with each passing day. Despite this, she maintained her patient approach. One afternoon, she sat cross-legged on a clean patch of straw, reading aloud from a book of poetry Carlos had lent her. The Mustang stood at the front of his stall, head lowered, listening to the rhythm of Spanish words that neither condemned nor demanded anything from him. "My grandfather said that horses remember everything," she told Sarah, who had become a regular presence during these sessions. "Every kindness, every cruelty. They carry it in their bodies like we carry memories in our minds." Sarah nodded, making notes in her journal. "There's scientific evidence supporting that. Horses develop physical patterns in response to trauma that can take years to undo. What you're doing, creating safety without pressure, it goes against everything traditional training teaches, but it's exactly what trauma research suggests works best." The veterinarian had begun documenting Esperanza's methods systematically, seeing potential for a revolutionary approach to rehabilitation for abused horses. Without telling Esperanza, she had shared some of her observations with colleagues at the university, who expressed keen interest in this unorthodox technique. As news of the extraordinary connection spread, the community of Haven Springs began to respond in unexpected ways. Carlos brought 2 other Mexican gardeners to watch from a respectful distance, their weathered faces softening at the sight of Esperanza's gentle work. Sarah invited 2 members of her Cherokee tribe, elders who nodded knowingly as they observed the interactions. "Our people have always understood that animals are not objects to be conquered," one of the elders told Esperanza afterward. "You have the old knowing in you, child." One snowy afternoon when Thornton was away at a horse auction in Kentucky, something extraordinary happened. The ranch was quieter than usual, many workers having left early due to the worsening weather. Sarah was methodically photographing and documenting Esperanza's session for her research when Esperanza made a decision that took even the veterinarian by surprise. "I'm going in," she said simply, moving toward the stall door. Sarah's eyes widened. "Esperanza, no, it's too dangerous. No matter how calm he seems, he's still a wild Mustang with trauma responses we can't predict." "Trust me," Esperanza replied with quiet certainty, "and trust him." With slow, deliberate movements, she unlatched the stall door and slipped inside, closing it behind her. Libertad's ears pricked forward, his body tensing momentarily before relaxing again. Esperanza made no move toward him, simply sitting down in the clean straw in the corner of the stall. From her position outside, Sarah held her breath, camera forgotten in her hand. Everything she knew about wild Mustangs, especially those with trauma histories, told her this was potentially deadly. Yet something in Esperanza's calm certainty made her hold her objections. For a full hour, the young woman and the Mustang regarded each other in near-perfect silence. Esperanza occasionally hummed the same Navajo song from their first meeting, a melody that seemed to resonate through the space between them. Libertad stood alert, but not afraid, his intelligent eyes never leaving her face. Then, with a grace that seemed impossible for an animal of such power, the Mustang took a step toward her, then another. Sarah's finger pressed the camera shutter automatically, capturing what happened next. Libertad, lowering himself to the straw beside Esperanza with careful deliberation, folding his legs beneath him. With breathtaking gentleness, he placed his massive head in her lap, like a child seeking comfort. Esperanza's hands trembled slightly as she raised them to stroke his mane, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. The trust being offered was so profound, so complete, that it transcended any need for words. In the quiet stable, with snow falling softly outside, a miracle of connection unfolded. "It's a miracle," Sarah whispered, her own eyes wet as she continued photographing the moment. Esperanza looked up, her hand never ceasing its gentle stroking of Libertad's mane. Her face held a wisdom beyond her years as she shook her head slightly. "No," she replied softly. "It's recognition. Broken souls recognize each other." Sarah lowered her camera, struck by the profound truth in those simple words. The photographs she had taken would become part of something larger than either of them could imagine, evidence of a connection that defied conventional understanding of both horse behavior and human-animal bonds. As the snow continued to fall outside, blanketing Haven Springs in pristine white, Sarah watched the young immigrant and the wild Mustang sharing a moment of perfect understanding. Two beings who had been uprooted from their homes, subjected to the control of others, finding in each other a recognition that transcended species. She thought about the photographs sitting in her camera's memory card, images that captured something raw and real that might help others understand what she was witnessing. Images that might change how people thought about trauma, healing, and the connections possible between different species. Images that might challenge the very foundation of traditional approaches to breaking wild spirits. What she couldn't know, as she watched Esperanza whisper gentle words to Libertad in the quiet stable, was that those photographs would soon cascade beyond her control, setting in motion events that would test the fragile trust being built in ways none of them were prepared for. "It's a miracle," Sarah whispered, photographing the moment with tears in her eyes, to which Esperanza responded while softly caressing the animal's mane. "No, it's recognition. Broken souls recognize each other." Sarah's photographs began a quiet revolution at Haven Springs. Within days, she had shared select images with Dr. Eleanor Hamilton, her former professor at Colorado State University's Equine Sciences program. The photographs showed Esperanza sitting peacefully with Libertad, his massive head resting in her lap, a position of vulnerability and trust that defied conventional understanding of wild Mustang behavior, especially those with trauma histories. "This challenges everything we teach about rehabilitation timelines," Dr. Hamilton wrote in her email response. "Would you consider documenting this as a formal case study?" Sarah glanced at her phone as another notification appeared, a message from Dr. Hamilton that her post on a private equine behavior forum had generated unprecedented interest. The quiet documentation had begun to spread beyond academic circles, reaching specialized blogs and professional groups across the country. Meanwhile, at Thornton Ranch, the dynamics were shifting rapidly. Richard Thornton's black Cadillac Escalade pulled into the circular driveway, kicking up gravel as it came to an abrupt stop. The ranch owner stepped out, followed by a tall, weathered man in expensive Western wear, Marcus Reed, one of Kentucky's most renowned horse trainers, known for producing winners through traditional methods. "I want to see this miracle Mustang immediately," Thornton announced as he strode into the main office where Sarah was reviewing medical records. "And where's the Mexican girl? The one who supposedly communicates with it?" "Esperanza is working with Libertad now," Sarah replied evenly, noticing how Thornton never used either of their names. "I can take you there." In the north stable, Esperanza sat cross-legged on a clean patch of straw outside Libertad's stall, playing a gentle melody on her borrowed guitar. The Mustang stood with his head lowered, eyes half closed in a state of relaxation that would have seemed impossible weeks earlier. His ears swiveled toward the music, body language showing none of the tension that normally accompanied human presence. The peaceful scene was shattered by the stable door swinging open. Libertad's head jerked up, ears pinning back as Thornton entered with Marcus Reed and Mike Peterson in tow. Esperanza stopped playing mid-chord, her body tensing visibly. "So this is our famous horse whisperer," Thornton said with a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I need a progress report. When can we start real training?" Esperanza rose slowly, keeping her movements fluid to avoid startling Libertad further. "He is learning to trust, senor. We cannot rush this." Marcus Reed stepped forward, his critical gaze sweeping over the Mustang. He wore a custom-made Stetson and hand-tooled boots that probably cost more than Esperanza earned in 6 months. "Impressive that you've gotten close to him, girl," Reed said, his southern drawl thick with condescension. "But now it's time for professionals to take over." Esperanza's eyes flicked toward Sarah, who had entered behind them. The veterinarian gave an almost imperceptible nod of support. "With respect, Mr. Reed," Esperanza said quietly, "Libertad has experienced much trauma. Traditional methods would destroy the trust we've built." Reed laughed, the sound echoing harshly in the stable. "Libertad? You named a potential racehorse Freedom? That's your first mistake, honey. These animals need structure, discipline. They're not people." Thornton interrupted impatiently. "Show me what progress you've made. 3 weeks of your singing and talking, and what do I have to show for it?" Libertad shifted restlessly in his stall, picking up on the tension radiating from the men. His nostrils flared, taking in their unfamiliar scents: cologne, leather, and the distinct smell of dominance that made his muscles coil tight beneath his black coat. "He allows touch now," Esperanza explained, moving toward the stall. "He accepts a blanket on his back, but he is not ready for—" "Blankets don't win races," Thornton cut in. "Reed here charges $5,000 a month to train champions. He says this animal has the build for greatness, if we can harness that wild energy." Reed gestured to his assistants who had been waiting by the door. They entered carrying an array of training equipment. Heavy bits, a severe-looking saddle, a training whip. The contrast between these implements of control and Esperanza's simple guitar couldn't have been more stark. First step is getting proper equipment on him, Reed explained professionally. Break the resistance early. Once he understands who's boss, the rest follows naturally. Libertad's reaction was immediate. At the sight of the equipment, memories of his capture flooded back. The helicopter thundering overhead, the panic of the herd, the rope tightening around his neck until he couldn't breathe. His eyes widened, showing the whites in a clear sign of fear. He retreated to the back of his stall, muscles trembling beneath his coat. "He's not ready," Esperanza said firmly, stepping between Reed's assistants and the stall. "Look at him. You're triggering his trauma response." Reed dismissed her concern with a wave. "That's just resistance. It needs to be overcome, not coddled. Hold him steady," he instructed his assistants, who moved toward the stall with practiced efficiency. Esperanza placed a hand on the stall door, blocking their path. Her small frame seemed impossibly fragile compared to the large men, yet something in her stance made them hesitate. "Please," she said, looking directly at Thornton. "Give me more time. Forcing him now will undo everything." Reed's patience snapped. "Step aside, girl. This is business, not a charity for wild animals or illegal immigrants." The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Esperanza's face remained impassive, but Sarah could see the hurt register in her eyes before she carefully masked it. Reed brushed past her, signaling to his assistants. They entered the stall with ropes, moving quickly to corner Libertad. The Mustang's reaction was explosive. He reared up, hooves slashing the air, a terrified scream tearing from his throat. One assistant barely dodged a strike that would have crushed his skull. The second managed to loop a rope around Libertad's neck, but the Mustang's panicked thrashing nearly pulled the man off his feet. Reed grabbed the severe bit, attempting to force it into the horse's mouth while his assistants struggled to hold the animal steady. Libertad fought with the desperate strength of a creature fighting for its life, his eyes rolling with terror. "Stop this immediately," Sarah's authoritative voice cut through the chaos. "You're going to kill him or get killed yourselves." Just then, Libertad broke free from one assistant's grip, his powerful body twisting away from the restraints. His hoof lashed out, missing Reed's face by inches. The trainer stumbled backward, falling ungracefully onto the stable floor as his prized Stetson went flying. "Get that devil under control," Thornton shouted, his face flushed with anger. In the midst of the chaos, Esperanza began to sing, a low, steady melody that somehow penetrated the frenzy. She made no move toward Libertad, simply stood where she was, singing the Navajo song from their first meeting. Gradually, impossibly, the Mustang's frantic movements began to slow. His ears, pinned flat against his head in terror, twitched toward the sound of her voice. When the immediate danger had passed, Thornton turned his fury on Esperanza. "I'm paying you to control that animal, not make friends with it. This is a business investment, not a therapy session." Sarah stepped between them, her professional demeanor unshakable. "As the veterinarian responsible for this animal's welfare, I need to inform you that forcing traditional methods now will result in complete regression. You'll lose everything we've gained." She pulled a tablet from her bag, quickly bringing up research studies and images. Current equine trauma research supports Esperanza's approach. This isn't mysticism, it's science. Look at these cortisol levels in traditionally broken horses versus those introduced to human contact gradually. While they argued, Carlos appeared at the stable door, ostensibly bringing fresh water. Two other Latino workers materialized shortly after, silently positioning themselves where they could observe the confrontation. Their presence created a subtle shift in the power dynamic. Esperanza was no longer alone. Sarah noticed two of her Cherokee tribal members arriving as well, supposedly bringing her some paperwork. Word had clearly spread through the informal networks that connected the marginalized communities of Haven Springs. Reed pulled himself to his feet, brushing straw from his expensive jeans with as much dignity as he could muster. "This illegal girl doesn't know anything about racehorses. She's wasting your investment, Thornton." Esperanza remained beside Libertad's stall, one hand raised slightly toward the Mustang, who had calmed considerably, though his sides still heaved with exertion. Despite her fear of Thornton, of deportation, of losing access to Libertad, she stood her ground. Libertad wasn't born to run in circles for entertainment, she said quietly. He was born to run free. The tension in the stable was thick enough to cut with a knife when the door burst open again. A young stable hand named Tyler rushed in, his face flushed with excitement. "Mr. Thornton, there are reporters at the main gate. They say they've come to see the Mustang miracle and the immigrant girl who talks to horses. They have photos." The color drained from Thornton's face as he realized his private property had suddenly become a matter of public interest. His calculating mind immediately shifted to damage control. "What reporters? Who authorized this?" he demanded, already pulling out his phone. Sarah and Esperanza exchanged a glance. The veterinarian hadn't intended for her academic documentation to reach the media. Something else was happening, something beyond their control. While Thornton was distracted, Sarah whispered to Esperanza, "Whatever happens next, remember you're not alone. We'll protect both of you and Libertad." As the ranch owner stormed out, followed by Reed and his assistants, Esperanza turned back to Libertad. The Mustang stood watching her, his intelligent eyes seeming to understand far more than anyone would believe possible. In that quiet moment of connection, both human and horse seemed to recognize that their peaceful world was about to change forever. While the confrontation intensified, a young stable hand burst into the stable. "Mr. Thornton, there are reporters at the main gate. They say they've come to see the miracle of the Mustang and the immigrant girl who talks to horses. They have photos." The ranch owner's face paled as he realized his private property had suddenly become a matter of public interest. The morning after the confrontation, Haven Springs woke to find its name splashed across the front page of the local newspaper. "Miracle at Thornton Ranch. The girl who tames with music," the headline proclaimed, accompanied by one of Sarah's photographs, showing Esperanza sitting peacefully beside Libertad, his massive head resting in her lap. The image captured something so intimate, so contrary to everything people believed about wild Mustangs, that it seemed almost supernatural to those unfamiliar with the weeks of patient work behind it. Richard Thornton stood on the immaculately maintained front lawn of his ranch, microphone in hand, as a local television crew filmed his carefully crafted response to the sudden publicity. "Thornton Ranch has always been at the forefront of innovative equine management," he said, his smile never reaching his cold eyes. "I'm proud to provide opportunities for people like Esperanza to develop their potential. Her natural affinity for horses is something we're nurturing here." The reporter, a young woman with sharp eyes, pressed further. "Sources say the Mustang was destined for culling before Ms. Ramirez began working with him. Is that true?" Thornton's smile tightened. "We evaluate all our animals based on their potential. This particular specimen has shown remarkable progress under our professional guidance." As soon as the cameras stopped rolling, Thornton's facade dropped. He pulled Mike Peterson aside, speaking in low, urgent tones as they walked toward the main house. "Keep that girl under control," he instructed, his voice cold with authority. "Make sure she understands her position here. One phone call from me to ICE would change her life completely. Remind her of that fact regularly." Peterson nodded, his weathered face impassive. "Yes, sir. And the reporters?" "Restricted access only. If they want to see the Mustang, they go through me first, and find out who leaked those photos. Someone's getting fired." In town, the story was creating ripples through the community of Haven Springs. At Maggie's Diner, the morning regulars clustered around copies of the newspaper, opinions dividing predictably along familiar lines. "That Thornton's always looking for publicity," said Frank Wilson, a third-generation cattle rancher, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "But I gotta admit, I've never seen anything like this. Wild Mustang letting someone that close? That ain't normal." "It's because she understands him," responded Elena Gutierrez, who ran the town's only bakery. My grandfather had the same gift with horses in Oaxaca. Some people just know how to listen to animals. What worries me, said Bill Hawkins, lowering his voice, is what happens if more illegal immigrants start coming here because of this story. We've got enough problems with the seasonal workers. Conversations like this played out across Haven Springs as the community processed the implications of having their small town suddenly in the spotlight. Some saw Esperanza as an inspiration. Others viewed her as a threat to the status quo. Almost everyone, however, was curious about the mysterious Mustang that had captured the public's imagination. At the ranch, Sarah Littlefeather was putting her academic connections to good use. She had arranged a small educational demonstration for a select group of veterinary students and equine behavior specialists from Colorado State University. Chairs were carefully positioned at a safe distance from the area where Esperanza worked with Libertad, allowing observation without interference. What you're about to witness, Sarah explained to the assembled group, challenges conventional wisdom about rehabilitation timelines for traumatized wild Mustangs. Please maintain absolute silence during the demonstration. Esperanza entered the space with her usual calm demeanor, seemingly unaffected by the watching eyes. Libertad, however, immediately sensed the change. His ears flicked nervously, nostrils flaring as he caught the scent of strangers. His powerful muscles tensed beneath his black coat, ready for flight or fight. Es normal, Esperanza soothed in Spanish, making no move toward the agitated horse. They are just watching, nothing more. She sat cross-legged on the ground, pulling out her guitar to play the gentle melody that had become their ritual. For nearly 20 minutes, she simply existed in the space with Libertad, asking nothing, demanding nothing. The students scribbled notes furiously, many looking confused at what appeared to be inaction. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, Libertad's posture changed. His ears, initially pinned back in stress, slowly rotated forward. The white-rimmed panic in his eyes subsided. His breathing, which had been rapid and shallow, deepened and slowed. When Esperanza finally rose, she moved to a small basket nearby and removed a folded blanket, a beautiful hand-woven piece with traditional Cherokee patterns that Sarah had given her. With slow, deliberate movements, she approached Libertad, the blanket held out before her. "This is from Sarah's people," she explained softly to the horse. "They too know what it means to be taken from your home, to have your freedom stolen." The students watched in stunned silence as Libertad, the Mustang that had nearly killed 3 men upon arrival, allowed Esperanza to place the colorful blanket across his back without resistance. His entire body remained relaxed, his intelligent eyes fixed on her face with something that looked remarkably like trust. "What we're witnessing," Sarah explained quietly to the group, "is not just animal training. It's interspecies communication based on respect rather than dominance. Notice how she never forces contact, never punishes or rewards in traditional ways. She creates a space where the horse can choose to connect." After the demonstration, several students approached Esperanza with questions, their initial academic skepticism giving way to genuine respect. A professor of equine psychology filmed the entire session, asking permission to use it in his next conference presentation. As the academic visitors departed, Carlos approached with 2 other Latino workers from the ranch. The elderly gardener had brought homemade tamales for Esperanza, a simple gesture of solidarity that spoke volumes. "Mi nieta, my granddaughter. She wants to be a veterinarian," he told her as they shared the meal. "I brought her the newspaper with your picture. She says now she believes it's possible." Carlos shared his own story with the small group that had gathered, how his father had been deported after 30 years working the same Colorado fields, how the man's extraordinary ability with injured animals had never been recognized as valuable by the ranch owners who employed him. They saw his hands as tools, not his heart as a gift, Carlos said, his weathered face solemn. "Like they see you, Pequeña. Be careful with Thornton. Men like him see people like us as replaceable parts in their machines." Later that afternoon, Sarah invited 2 elders from her Cherokee community to observe Esperanza's work. The women watched in respectful silence, their lined faces revealing nothing until the session concluded. "There are parallels," The older woman, Margaret Blackhawk, told Esperanza afterward. Between what was done to the Mustangs and what was done to our people, both were seen as obstacles to be removed, wild spirits to be broken. What you're doing here honors the true nature of this animal. You're not breaking his spirit, you're healing it. These small gatherings began happening more frequently, creating an informal support network around Esperanza and Libertad. The quiet solidarity provided a counterbalance to the growing pressure from Thornton, who observed these developments with calculated interest. From the window of his office overlooking the ranch, Thornton watched another small group visiting the North Stable. His fingers tapped rapidly on his smartphone as he made notes. "This publicity angle might be more valuable than I thought," he mused to Marcus Reed, who had remained at the ranch despite the disastrous first encounter with Libertad. "People love inspirational animal stories. There's money in that." "But not racing money," Reed countered, still smarting from his public humiliation. "That animal will never be a racehorse. He's too old, too wild." "There are other ways to profit from a miracle Mustang," Thornton replied, his mind already calculating potential revenue streams. "Exhibition shows, special appearances, merchandising. People will pay good money to see this freak show." Esperanza, unaware she was being observed, was demonstrating to a small group how Libertad now accepted gentle touches along his neck, a remarkable achievement for a horse who had been captured violently from the wild only months before. She didn't hear Thornton's plans, but she felt the weight of his gaze from the window above, a constant reminder of the precarious nature of her position. Later that evening, Sarah introduced Esperanza to Jim Blackwood, the retired sheriff who now headed the local Animal Protection Society. The tall, silver-haired man studied Esperanza with kind eyes that missed nothing. "What you're doing with that Mustang is extraordinary," he said without preamble. "I've worked with rescue horses for 20 years. Never seen anything like the connection you two have." "Libertad does all the work," Esperanza replied modestly. "I just give him time and respect. That's exactly why it works." Jim nodded approvingly. "Most folks want to impose their will. You're letting him find his own way back to trust." As darkness fell over the ranch and visitors departed, Esperanza took a moment alone with Libertad. The Mustang approached the stall door willingly now, his ears pricked forward in greeting when she appeared. She stroked his forehead gently, finding the spot between his eyes that he particularly enjoyed. "I am worried, amigo," she confessed softly in Spanish. "Thornton watches us now with different eyes. Not angry anymore, but calculating. This is sometimes more dangerous." Sarah found her there, the young woman and the Mustang communing quietly in the dimly lit stable. The veterinarian leaned against the opposite wall, watching the easy intimacy between them with professional appreciation. "Thornton doesn't see either of you as living beings," Esperanza said quietly, turning to Sarah. "Just property to be used, like he sees me." "That's why we need to be careful," Sarah agreed. "The publicity is bringing attention to Libertad's story, which offers some protection, but it also makes you more visible to immigration authorities." Esperanza nodded, her fingers still gently stroking Libertad's muzzle. "My grandfather said that when you work with powerful animals, you must always be honest. They sense deception. So I will tell you honestly, Sarah, I am afraid, but I cannot abandon him now." The Mustang nudged her shoulder gently, as if understanding her words. His eyes, once wild with terror, now held a steady intelligence as they fixed on her face. The bond between them had grown into something remarkable, a bridge between species built on patience, respect, and shared trauma, transformed into trust. After all visitors had left, Esperanza whispered to Libertad while caressing his neck, "I don't know how much time we have together, friend. He is planning something, and I'm afraid of what it might be." Unaware that Richard Thornton had just received a phone call that would change everything, an offer from the Frontier Rodeo in Texas to buy the Black Mustang as their new main attraction. The phone call lasted less than 3 minutes, but its implications hung in the crisp mountain air long after Richard Thornton set down his phone. His thin lips curved into a satisfied smile as he gazed out his office window at the snow-dusted pastures of his ranch. The Frontier Rodeo in Texas had just offered an obscene amount of money for the black Mustang, not as a racehorse but as their star challenge horse for the upcoming season. The following morning, Thornton called a mandatory meeting for all stable staff. The temperature had dropped overnight, turning Haven Springs into a winter postcard with frost-rimmed windows and chimney smoke rising in vertical columns against the clear blue sky. Employees stamped their feet and blew into cupped hands as they gathered in the main stable, their breath visible in the cold air. "I've made a business decision," Thornton announced without preamble, his expensive wool coat setting him apart from the workers in their worn jackets. "I've sold the Mustang to the Frontier Rodeo in Texas. They're paying top dollar for him as a challenge horse." A ripple of murmurs passed through the group. Everyone knew what challenge horse meant. Mustangs used in rodeos for 8-second bronc riding competitions were chosen specifically for their aggression and power. The most violent buckers became crowd favorites, subjected to repeated sessions of intentionally agitating rides until they either broke physically or mentally. Esperanza stood frozen at the back of the group, her face draining of color. Her hands, which had been warming in her pockets, now hung limply at her sides. The words hit her like physical blows, each one stealing a little more of her breath. "You can't do this," she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. Every head turned toward her, and she realized she had spoken louder than intended. Still, she couldn't back down. "He won't survive that life." Thornton's gaze fixed on her with cold precision. "I can, and I will. It's business, girl. He's worth more as spectacle than as a charity project for illegal immigrants." The casual cruelty of his words hung in the air. Mike Peterson smirked slightly, while other workers studied the ground, unwilling to meet Esperanza's eyes. Only Carlos, the elderly gardener, moved slightly closer to her in silent solidarity. "This meeting is over," Thornton concluded. "The transport team arrives in 2 weeks. Peterson, make sure the paperwork is in order." As the group dispersed, Sarah Littlefeather approached Esperanza, her face tight with controlled anger. "This is unconscionable," she said in a low voice. "After all the progress you've made with him." "What can we do?" Esperanza asked, her voice hollow. "I don't know yet, but I'm not giving up without a fight." Sarah was true to her word. By that afternoon, she had contacted Jim Blackwood, the retired sheriff who headed the local Animal Protection Society. Within days, a small but determined group began to organize. They met in Jim's modest home on the outskirts of town, the living room crowded with a diverse coalition of concerned citizens, from Sarah's Cherokee tribal members to local ranch hands, from the high school biology teacher to Elena from the bakery. "The law is frustratingly clear," Jim explained, pacing before the crackling fireplace. "Animals are property. Thornton has the legal right to sell his horse to whomever he chooses." "But it's cruel," protested a young veterinary student who had witnessed Esperanza's demonstration. "That Mustang has shown remarkable cognitive abilities and emotional intelligence, which is precisely why we need to fight this in the court of public opinion," Sarah replied, her laptop open to show the photographs documenting Libertad's extraordinary journey. "These images tell a story that could change hearts and minds." While the community mobilized, Esperanza faced an agonizing dilemma. The morning after Thornton's announcement, Mike Peterson cornered her in the feed room, his bulky frame blocking the exit. "The boss wanted me to remind you of your particular situation," he said, his voice deceptively casual. "One phone call to ICE, and you'd be in a detention center faster than you can say deportation. Keep that in mind before you start encouraging these protesters." The threat hung in the air between them. Esperanza said nothing, but her heart pounded painfully against her ribs. Being deported would mean returning to a Mexico she barely remembered, separated forever from Libertad. The Mustang would face his fate alone, confused by her abandonment after earning his trust. "No tengo opción," Esperanza told Sarah later, her voice breaking as they sat in the veterinarian's truck. "I have no choice." Sarah gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. That's blackmail, Esperanza. He's using your status against you. What can I do? Without papers, I have no rights here. There's always a choice, Sarah insisted, her dark eyes intense. My Cherokee ancestors knew this when they faced forces much greater than themselves. Sometimes the choice is between different kinds of courage. Within days, a small but persistent group of protesters appeared at the entrance to Thornton Ranch. Save Libertad read their hand-painted signs. Stop Animal Cruelty proclaimed others. Local news outlets picked up the story, particularly after Sarah shared her documentation with select journalists, explaining the extraordinary rehabilitation process and the cruelty of sending a recovering traumatized animal to a rodeo. It's just a horse, Thornton complained to the cameras of the local station that arrived to cover the protest. This is private property, and I have the right to dispose of my animals as I see fit. But the pressure continued to build. Sarah had shared her photographs and observations with equine behavior experts across the country, many of whom confirmed what she already knew. Sending an animal in the process of trauma rehabilitation to a rodeo was unnecessary cruelty that would almost certainly result in catastrophic regression or physical injury. Esperanza watched these developments with a mixture of hope and dread. She continued her daily sessions with Libertad, treasuring each moment while knowing their time together was limited. The Mustang seemed to sense the change. His behavior had become increasingly affectionate, as if trying to communicate something urgent before it was too late. He knows, Esperanza told Carlos one evening as they sat sharing a thermos of hot chocolate outside the stable. Animals understand more than we think. He senses something is wrong. Carlos nodded, his weathered face solemn in the fading light. Mi padre, he always said animals see the truth that humans hide. Your Libertad knows you are fighting for him, Niña. Inside the stable, Libertad moved restlessly in his stall. Since Thornton's announcement, his behavior had subtly changed. The Mustang watched the comings and goings of ranch personnel with newfound intensity, his intelligent eyes tracking uniforms, vehicles, anything unfamiliar. When Thornton approached the stable one afternoon, accompanied by potential buyers wanting to see the famous Mustang, Libertad's reaction was immediate. He retreated to the back of his stall, muscles tensed, eyes showing white rims of fear. He remembers being taken before, Esperanza explained to Sarah. He knows what humans with paperwork and trailers mean. The psychological burden weighed heavily on Esperanza. Each night she returned to her tiny rented room above Mrs. Gonzalez's garage, her body aching from physical labor, her mind tortured by impossible choices. Should she risk deportation by openly joining the protesters? Should she attempt something more desperate to save Libertad? Or should she protect herself, knowing that being sent back to Mexico would help neither of them? One evening, as snow began to fall in thick, silent flakes, Sarah found Esperanza sitting alone in the tack room, tears streaming down her face. I dreamed of my parents last night, she confessed quietly. They were lost in the desert, calling my name. But when I ran to them, they turned into Libertad, trapped in a rodeo arena, bleeding. Sarah sat beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Trauma connects us to other beings who've suffered. It's why you understand him so well. What good is understanding if I cannot help him? We're not beaten yet, Sarah replied firmly. Jim Blackwood has contacted animal welfare organizations across 3 states. The story is spreading. Thornton may be rich and powerful, but even he can't ignore public opinion entirely. The confrontation reached its apex during a particularly severe snowstorm. While protesters huddled under umbrellas at the main entrance, their numbers diminished, but their determination intact. A tragedy was unfolding in the mountains nearby. 2 children of tourists, Ethan and Lily Anderson, aged 8 and 6, had become separated from their parents during what was supposed to be a simple nature walk. As conditions worsened, turning the search into a race against time, the entire community mobilized. Emergency services, volunteers, and even Thornton Ranch employees joined the effort, leaving the stables with minimal supervision. The children had been missing for nearly 4 hours, and with temperatures plummeting and visibility reduced to mere feet, everyone understood the grave implications. It was in this moment of chaos that Esperanza made a decision that would change everything. Taking advantage of the nearly deserted stables, she slipped into the north barn, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it would give her away. With trembling fingers, she unlatched Libertad's stall door. "You deserve to choose your own destiny," she whispered to the Mustang, proceeding to unlock the external gates as well. She had expected, hoped even, that Libertad would immediately bolt for the mountains, disappearing into the wilderness where no one could capture him again. Instead, the Mustang stood perfectly still, studying her with those intelligent eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of his wild ancestors. Something in his posture, in the way he sniffed the storm-laden air, alerted Esperanza that something unusual was happening. "What is it? What do you feel?" she asked, watching as the horse's ears swiveled, catching sounds imperceptible to human hearing. As if responding to her question, Libertad began walking purposefully toward the open gate, stopping occasionally to look back, checking if she was following. His behavior was so deliberate, so clearly communicative, that Esperanza felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "You want me to come with you?" she asked in bewilderment. Following her instinct, she climbed onto Libertad's back without saddle or bridle, the first time anyone had mounted the untamable Mustang. The horse accepted her weight without resistance, as if this partnership had been inevitable from their first meeting. Together they headed into the darkness of the storm-lashed forest, two fugitives united in their quest for freedom. "I don't know where you're taking me, amigo," Esperanza whispered, leaning close against his warm neck as snow pelted them from all sides. "But I trust you." Libertad moved with confidence through the blinding snow, his instincts guiding them where human senses would have failed completely. Deep in her heart, Esperanza whispered to herself, "No te abandonaré, lo prometo," without knowing that her promise not to abandon him would be tested in ways that neither she nor Libertad could have imagined, as the storm intensified around them, bringing with it both danger and an unexpected opportunity. The ferocity of the snowstorm intensified with each passing minute, transforming the familiar landscape of Haven Springs into an alien wilderness of swirling white. Esperanza clung to Libertad's warm body, her fingers tangled in his thick mane as he navigated the treacherous terrain with remarkable confidence. Despite the blinding conditions, the Mustang moved with purpose, his powerful muscles carrying them deeper into the forest-covered foothills. "Where are we going?" Esperanza whispered, though she knew no answer would come. The wind howled around them, drowning her words, yet she sensed Libertad could hear her through the vibrations in her body. The Mustang paused atop a small ridge, his ears swiveling like radar dishes, catching sounds imperceptible to human hearing. His nostrils flared, drawing in scents carried on the frigid air. Something in his demeanor changed, a new urgency in his stance, a quickening of breath. Without warning, he changed direction, descending the slope toward a densely wooded area. Esperanza had surrendered completely to his guidance, recognizing something profound in the animal's behavior. This wasn't random flight. Libertad was tracking something, following invisible signals that transcended human perception. The forest grew thicker, pine branches heavy with snow creating a labyrinth of white. Libertad slowed his pace, picking his way carefully between the trees. Suddenly, he halted, ears pricked forward intently. Esperanza held her breath, listening. At first, she heard nothing beyond the moan of wind through the branches. Then, faint but unmistakable, a child's cry. "Dios mío," she gasped, sliding from Libertad's back. "Someone's out here." Following the sound, she pushed through snow-laden branches until she reached a small clearing. There, partially collapsed under the weight of accumulated snow, stood an old hunter's cabin. Another cry emerged from within, thin and frightened. Esperanza rushed forward, fighting through knee-deep snow. The cabin door had been blocked by a fallen branch, and part of the roof had caved in from the weight of the snow. Through a broken window, she could see movement inside. "Hello?" "Is someone there?" she called, clearing snow from the window frame. Two small faces appeared, their features tight with cold and fear. A boy and a younger girl, their skin pale with the beginning stages of hypothermia. "We're stuck," the boy called, his voice shaking. "The door won't open, and Lily's hurt." Esperanza worked frantically to clear the fallen branch blocking the door, Libertad watching attentively from a few feet away. When she finally managed to force the door open, she found 8-year-old Ethan Anderson cradling his 6-year-old sister Lily, whose leg was trapped beneath a fallen beam. "We got lost," Ethan explained through chattering teeth as Esperanza examined the situation. "Dad said stay on the trail, but we saw a deer and followed it. Then the snow got so bad we couldn't see the path. We found this cabin, but then part of it fell down." Working carefully, Esperanza managed to lift the beam enough for Ethan to pull his sister free. The little girl whimpered in pain. Her ankle was swollen but not obviously broken. More concerning was their body temperature. Both children showed signs of dangerous cold exposure. "We need to keep you warm until help comes," Esperanza said, removing her coat to wrap around Lily despite the cabin's bitter cold. "Are you a ranger?" Ethan asked, his eyes wide. "No, mi niño. I work with horses." She helped them move to the most stable corner of the cabin, away from the partially collapsed roof. "But I crossed the desert once, when I was not much older than you. I know about surviving in bad weather." Using techniques learned during her own traumatic border crossing years before, Esperanza gathered what materials she could find: an old tarpaulin, some moldy blankets from a shelf, creating a small shelter within the cabin. She used her body heat to warm the children, telling them stories to keep them awake and alert. Outside, the storm showed no signs of relenting. Esperanza knew they couldn't remain in the damaged cabin indefinitely. The structural integrity was compromised, and the temperature continued to drop. They needed rescue, but with visibility near zero, their chances of being found diminished with each passing hour. Libertad remained near the cabin, occasionally peering through the broken window as if checking on them. Watching him, Esperanza was struck by a wild, impossible idea. "Libertad," she said, stepping outside briefly. The Mustang approached immediately, nuzzling her shoulder. "We need help. The niños will die without help." The Mustang's intelligent eyes seemed to hold her gaze with understanding. Esperanza placed her hands on either side of his powerful head, bringing her forehead to rest against his. "Find help," she whispered. "Like you found them, please." What happened next defied everything Esperanza thought she knew about horses. Libertad snorted once, pawing the ground, before turning and galloping into the white void of the storm, his black form quickly swallowed by the swirling snow. Inside the cabin, Esperanza returned to the children, singing soft lullabies while rubbing their limbs to maintain circulation. An hour passed, then another. Lily drifted in and out of sleep despite Esperanza's efforts to keep her awake, a dangerous sign. "Will someone find us?" Ethan asked, his young face serious beyond his years. "Yes," Esperanza replied with more confidence than she felt. "Libertad will bring help." "The horse understands you?" "He understands more than most people think possible." Meanwhile, at the Haven Springs Sheriff's Department, chaos reigned. The search for the missing Anderson children had been hampered by deteriorating weather conditions, forcing many rescue teams to return to base. Maps were spread across tables as Sheriff Reynolds coordinated with state emergency services. "We've covered the main trails," a deputy reported, marking off sections on the map. "But with visibility less than 10 feet, we're basically searching blind." The front doors suddenly burst open, bringing with them a swirl of snow and a blast of frigid air. Standing in the doorway, his black coat covered in ice crystals, was Libertad. The massive Mustang stomped his hooves on the linoleum floor, snorting clouds of steam in the heated office. "What the hell?" Sheriff Reynolds exclaimed, reaching instinctively for his sidearm. "It's Thornton's horse," someone shouted. "The famous one from the news." Libertad paced nervously, moving toward the door and then back to the stunned officers, his behavior clearly agitated yet purposeful. When Deputy Reynolds approached, the Mustang retreated to the doorway, tossing his head and whinnying loudly. "He wants us to follow him," said Diego Reyes, the department's youngest officer. His colleagues looked at him skeptically. "No, seriously. My grandfather raised horses in Argentina. This isn't normal behavior. He's trying to communicate something." "You're crazy," Sheriff Reynolds replied. "It's just a spooked horse that wandered into town." "With respect, sir," Diego persisted, "this particular horse has been all over the news for his unusual intelligence. And he came specifically to the sheriff's department, not just any building in town. That can't be coincidence." Reynolds hesitated, looking from the determined young officer to the equally determined Mustang still stamping impatiently at the doorway. "The Anderson kids are still out there," Diego added quietly. "What if he knows something we don't?" Something in the Mustang's behavior, the insistent stamping, the way he continually looked back at them before moving toward the door again, finally convinced the sheriff. "Garcia, Reyes with me," he ordered, grabbing his coat. "Jensen, call Thornton Ranch and tell them their $1 million horse is at the station, and get the animal rescue unit on standby." 3 officers followed Libertad into the storm, the Mustang setting a brisk pace that the men struggled to match in their heavy gear. They navigated through town and into the foothills, the horse occasionally pausing to ensure they were still following. "This is insane," Garcia muttered, snow caking his beard. "Following a horse through a blizzard." "My grandfather would say some animals are spirit guides," Diego replied, his eyes never leaving Libertad's form ahead of them. "The indigenous people of Argentina believed horses could see between worlds." The Mustang led them deeper into the forest, following a path invisible to human eyes. After nearly 40 minutes of grueling travel, they crested a small ridge, and there in the valley below stood the dilapidated hunter's cabin, a thin wisp of smoke rising from its damaged chimney. Inside the cabin, Esperanza had built a small fire using broken furniture pieces, trying desperately to raise the temperature for the increasingly unresponsive Lily. When shouts came from outside, she nearly collapsed with relief. "In here," she called. "Ayuda! The children need medical attention." Sheriff Reynolds burst through the door, followed by his deputies. Their expressions registered shock at finding Esperanza there, but professionalism quickly took over as they assessed the children's condition. "How did you find them?" Reynolds asked as they carefully moved Lily onto an emergency blanket. "No fui yo," Esperanza replied, exhaustion evident in her voice. "It was Libertad. He knew. He brought me here." Diego Reyes translated for his colleagues, adding, "And then he came straight to the sheriff's department and got us to follow him back here." Reynolds shook his head in disbelief as they prepared to transport the children. "That's impossible. Horses don't." "This one does," Esperanza said simply. As they emerged from the cabin, Libertad stood watching from the tree line, his dark form a stark contrast against the white landscape. When Esperanza approached him, he lowered his head to her shoulder in what could only be described as an embrace. The rescue made headlines across Colorado. "Mustang leads police to lost children," proclaimed the Denver Post. The story of the young immigrant and the dangerous Mustang who had united to save 2 innocent children captured the imagination of people far beyond Haven Springs. Local news stations played footage of Libertad entering the sheriff's department, while national outlets picked up the human interest angle of a formerly unapproachable wild horse becoming a hero. Richard Thornton found himself at the center of a storm of criticism when journalists discovered his plans to send the hero horse to a rodeo. Reporters camped outside his property, demanding statements about the Mustang's fate. "I don't know what everyone is talking about," Thornton defended himself to a particularly persistent CNN correspondent. "It's just an animal that followed its instinct." But the evidence against this simple explanation was overwhelming. Sarah Littlefeather presented her study documenting the extraordinary connection between Esperanza and Libertad. Equine behavior experts confirmed that what the Mustang had done defied conventional explanations, suggesting levels of cognitive processing and empathetic response previously undocumented in horses. For Esperanza, the sudden fame brought both opportunity and danger. As the community rallied around her and Libertad, her undocumented status became part of the national conversation. Immigration advocates pointed to her heroism as evidence of the contributions made by undocumented residents, while others insisted that the law is the law, regardless of individual actions. In the sheriff's office at Haven Springs, the chaos reigned when the doors opened violently. To the astonishment of everyone present, a huge black Mustang entered the lobby, frantically neighing and retreating to the door, clearly trying to communicate something that defied all rational explanation. "He wants us to follow him," said Diego Reyes, the department's youngest officer. His colleagues looked at him skeptically as the black Mustang paced nervously at the doorway, tossing his head and whinnying with unmistakable urgency. "You're crazy," Sheriff Reynolds replied, adjusting his hat. "It's just a spooked horse that wandered into town." Diego stepped forward, his voice gaining confidence. "With respect, sir, this particular horse has been all over the news for his unusual intelligence, and he came specifically to the sheriff's department, not just any building in town." The Mustang stamped impatiently, moving toward the door and then back toward the officers, his behavior exhibiting a deliberate pattern that was impossible to dismiss as random. "The Anderson kids are still out there," Diego added quietly. "What if he knows something we don't?" Something in the young deputy's earnestness, combined with the Mustang's insistent behavior, finally penetrated the sheriff's skepticism. "Garcia, Reyes with me," he ordered, grabbing his heavy winter coat. "Jensen, call Thornton Ranch and tell them their $1 million horse is here. And get the animal rescue unit on standby." The three officers followed Libertad into the blinding storm, struggling to keep pace as the Mustang navigated through the white-out conditions with uncanny precision. What should have been an impossible tracking mission in zero visibility became a surreal procession led by an animal that, according to conventional wisdom, shouldn't possess the cognitive ability to understand the concept of rescue, let alone initiate one. After nearly 40 minutes of grueling travel through deep snow and dense forest, they found the collapsing hunter's cabin. Inside, Esperanza was desperately trying to keep the Anderson children warm, little Lily slipping in and out of consciousness despite her efforts. The rescue operation moved swiftly after that. As emergency services transported the children to the hospital, Sheriff Reynolds turned to Esperanza with undisguised bewilderment. "How did you find them?" he asked, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Esperanza looked toward Libertad, who stood watchfully at the tree line. "No fui yo," she answered simply. "It was Libertad. He knew. He brought me here." Within 24 hours, the story had exploded across media platforms. Local news stations played shaky cell phone footage of Libertad entering the sheriff's department, recorded by a startled receptionist. National outlets picked up the human interest angle, with headlines declaring, "Hero Horse Saves Lost Children," and "Wild Mustang Shows Extraordinary Intelligence in Mountain Rescue." In the intensive care unit of Haven Springs Memorial Hospital, the Anderson family gathered around Lily's bed. The 6-year-old had suffered moderate hypothermia and a sprained ankle, but was expected to make a full recovery, an outcome doctors described as miraculous given the circumstances. If they hadn't been found when they were, Dr. Harris told the parents, letting the implication hang in the air. Lisa Anderson, a neuroscientist at the University of Colorado, held her daughter's hand tightly. "We need to meet her," she told her husband, a pediatric surgeon, "the young woman who found them." "And the horse," 8-year-old Ethan insisted from his own hospital bed. "Mom, you wouldn't believe it. The horse understood what she said to him. It wasn't normal." Dr. Anderson raised an eyebrow at her son's statement. As a neuroscientist specializing in cognitive development, she was naturally skeptical of attributing human-like comprehension to animals. Yet her son's unwavering certainty gave her pause. Meanwhile, Richard Thornton found himself besieged by media inquiries. Reporters camped outside his property gates, thrusting microphones toward his car window whenever he entered or exited. "Mr. Thornton, is it true you're still planning to sell the Hero Mustang to a rodeo? Will you reconsider your decision in light of these extraordinary events? What's your response to the petition with over 10,000 signatures asking you to keep Libertad at Haven Springs?" Thornton attempted to maintain his usual composure, offering carefully crafted statements from behind the safety of his ranch gates. "I don't know what everyone is talking about," he told a CNN correspondent who had managed to secure a brief interview. "It's just an animal that followed its instinct. Horses have good senses. There's nothing miraculous about it." But the evidence against this simple explanation mounted daily. Sarah Littlefeather compiled her months of documentation into a comprehensive presentation, sharing it with equine behavior experts nationwide. Their responses were unanimously astonished. "What you're describing goes beyond any documented case of equine cognitive processing," wrote Dr. Jonathan Mercer from Cornell University's Veterinary College. "The sequence of events, finding the children, then independently seeking human assistance and leading them back, suggests levels of abstract thinking and intentionality previously unrecorded in equids." 3 days after the rescue, Sarah organized a press conference at the small Haven Springs Community Center. Local and national media crowded the room as she methodically presented her findings, supported by photographs, video, and expert testimonials. "This isn't about anthropomorphizing an animal," she explained, displaying a timeline of Libertad's rehabilitation. "This is about recognizing that our understanding of animal cognition may be far more limited than we've assumed. What Esperanza achieved with Libertad in just months challenges everything we thought we knew about trauma recovery in wild Mustangs." The presentation included before and after footage. Libertad upon arrival, violent and terrified, contrasted with recent images of the same animal gently accepting Esperanza's touch, responding to verbal cues, and demonstrating what could only be described as emotional attunement. Most importantly, Sarah concluded, sending an animal of this extraordinary sensitivity and intelligence to a rodeo environment would constitute deliberate psychological trauma. It would be like rehabilitating a war veteran only to send them back to the battlefield. While the experts debated, the people of Haven Springs were forming their own opinions. The town had been divided when the story first broke, some viewing Esperanza as an inspiration, others concerned about her undocumented status. But the rescue of the Anderson children had shifted the narrative dramatically. "Those kids would be dead if not for her and that horse," Frank Wilson declared at Maggie's Diner, surprising those who knew him as a staunch conservative. "Don't much care about her papers when there's 2 children alive because of what she did." Even more surprising was the growing coalition of support from groups that rarely found common ground. Ranchers appreciating the Mustang's extraordinary abilities, immigrant advocacy organizations highlighting Esperanza's heroism, animal rights activists fighting against Libertad's sale to the rodeo, and ordinary citizens moved by the unlikely partnership between a marginalized young woman and a traumatized wild horse. For Esperanza, the sudden fame brought a complicated mix of opportunity and danger. Immigration attorneys contacted her, explaining that her actions might qualify her for a special visa. "There's a visa category for individuals who demonstrate extraordinary ability," explained Maria Gonzalez, an attorney who had offered her services pro bono. "Your work with Libertad, especially in light of the rescue, could potentially qualify." But the spotlight also meant increased scrutiny of her immigration status. Conservative commentators questioned whether breaking the law should be overlooked, regardless of heroic actions. Online debates raged, with Esperanza's personal history dissected by strangers who had never met her. Through it all, Esperanza continued her daily visits with Libertad, their bond seemingly strengthened by their shared adventure. The Mustang, once so traumatized he would attack anyone who approached, now greeted her with gentle nudges and soft, nickering sounds. In private moments, away from cameras and curious onlookers, she would rest her forehead against his, whispering gratitude for his trust and courage. "You showed them who you really are," she told him in Spanish, stroking the white star on his forehead. "Not the demon they thought, but a soul with so much to give." The Andersons were finally permitted to leave the hospital 5 days after the rescue. Instead of returning directly to their home in Boulder, they drove to Haven Springs, determined to meet the young woman who had saved their children. The meeting took place at the Thornton Ranch gates, where Esperanza had reluctantly agreed to speak with them away from the protesters who now regularly gathered there. When Lisa Anderson embraced her, the tears flowed freely from both women. "You saved our whole world," the mother whispered. How can we ever thank you? It wasn't just me, Esperanza replied, glancing toward the stables where Libertad was kept. Without him, I would never have found them. Michael Anderson, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. Ethan has been insisting that the horse somehow understood what was happening, that it wasn't just animal instinct. Would you like to meet him? Esperanza asked, already knowing the answer. The introduction of the Anderson family to Libertad became another viral moment in the unfolding story. The Mustang, usually wary of strangers, approached the family with careful curiosity, paying particular attention to the children. When Lily, still using crutches for her sprained ankle, held out her small hand, Libertad lowered his massive head to gently touch her palm with his muzzle. Dr. Lisa Anderson, the skeptical neuroscientist, stood speechless. The level of apparent emotional intelligence, she murmured, is extraordinary. Their visit concluded with an unexpected announcement. Michael Anderson stepped forward to address the small crowd of staff and media that had gathered. As physicians and scientists, my wife and I believe in evidence, he began. What we've witnessed today defies conventional explanation. This horse demonstrated cognitive and empathetic capabilities that deserve serious scientific study, not exploitation in a rodeo ring. He turned to face the cameras directly. Our family is formally requesting that Mr. Thornton reconsider his decision to sell Libertad. These remarkable abilities should be documented and studied, not destroyed for entertainment. The Andersons' medical credentials and scientific authority lent new weight to the growing movement. Their statement was broadcast nationally, putting additional pressure on Thornton, whose business associates were beginning to express concern about the negative publicity. That evening, a community meeting was held at Haven Springs Town Hall. The normally sleepy civic gathering was standing room only, with residents from across the political and social spectrum united in unexpected alliance. Jim Blackwood, the retired sheriff who headed the local Animal Protection Society, took the podium after nearly 2 hours of passionate testimony from community members. I've spent my retirement trying to protect animals that can't protect themselves, the silver-haired man began, his voice carrying the weight of his years of service. Tonight I'm announcing that I'm donating 50 acres of my land for the creation of a sanctuary for wild horses. We just need our first resident. All eyes in the room turned toward Richard Thornton, who sat stiffly in the back row, suddenly finding himself the focus of an entire community's attention and expectation. All eyes in the town hall of Haven Springs turned toward Richard Thornton. The pressure that had been building for weeks now crystallized into this singular moment. The oil magnate shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his customary composure cracking under the weight of hundreds of expectant gazes. Jim Blackwood's announcement still hung in the air. 50 acres donated for a wild horse sanctuary. The implied question was obvious. Would Thornton be the villain who denied Libertad the chance at a better life, or would he yield to the overwhelming public sentiment? In the tense silence, Sarah Littlefeather rose from her seat near the front. Her voice, calm and measured, carried throughout the packed room. This isn't just about one horse anymore, she said. This has become about who we are as a community. Do we value profit over compassion? Do we recognize intelligence and emotional capacity only in beings that look like us? The crowd murmured in agreement. Thornton's jaw tightened visibly. The science is clear, Sarah continued, her academic authority lending weight to her words. Libertad has demonstrated cognitive and emotional capabilities that challenge our understanding of equine cognition. As a veterinarian, I can tell you that sending him to a rodeo would be the equivalent of psychological torture. From the back of the room, Elena Gutierrez, the bakery owner, called out, "And what about Esperanza? Without her, none of this would have happened." A chorus of agreement followed. The community's focus expanded beyond Libertad to include the young woman who had created the miracle connection that saved 2 children's lives. Carlos, the elderly gardener, stood with difficulty, his weathered hands gripping the seat in front of him for support. In my 68 years in this country, I have seen how people like us, He gestured to himself and toward Esperanza, who sat quietly near the side door. "Are valued only for our labor, never for our knowledge or our hearts. This young woman has wisdom my people have carried for generations. This is not magic. It is ancient understanding that your modern world has forgotten." The local high school science teacher, Ms. Reynolds, joined the conversation. "I brought my students to observe Esperanza's methods. What they witnessed wasn't mysticism. It was communication based on respect rather than dominance. This could revolutionize how we approach animal rehabilitation." Throughout the testimonies, Esperanza remained silent, her eyes occasionally meeting Libertad's in her mind. Despite the crowded room and impassioned speeches, her thoughts kept returning to the peaceful moments in the stable, the Mustang's breath warm against her palm, his intelligent eyes meeting hers in perfect understanding. The meeting continued for another hour, voices from all corners of the community joining together in an unusual alliance. Ranchers who normally concerned themselves only with cattle prices spoke of the dignity deserved by working animals. Conservative business owners who had previously complained about undocumented workers now praised Esperanza's contribution to the town's safety. Thornton finally rose, his expression unreadable. "I appreciate the community's enthusiasm," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "But business decisions aren't made by popular vote. I'll take your opinions under advisement." With that, he strode from the hall, leaving a wake of whispers and disappointed faces behind him. The following morning, Esperanza received an unexpected visitor at the small room she rented above Mrs. Gonzalez's garage. Maria Gonzalez, the immigration attorney who had offered her services pro bono, arrived with a portfolio tucked under her arm. "I've been reviewing your case," she said as they sat at the tiny kitchen table. "There's a path forward we should discuss." Esperanza wrapped her hands around a chipped mug of coffee. "What kind of path?" "The U-Visa," Maria explained. "It's designed for victims of certain crimes who cooperate with law enforcement. Workplace exploitation and coercion qualify, especially when an employer uses immigration status as leverage." "You mean Mr. Thornton's threats?" Maria nodded. "His repeated reminders that he could have you deported constitute workplace coercion. We have witnesses who overheard these threats, including Dr. Littlefeather." Hope flickered briefly in Esperanza's eyes before doubt clouded them again. "But fighting him means I might lose access to Libertad completely." "It's a risk," Maria acknowledged. "But right now, you're both vulnerable. This might be a way to protect both of you." That afternoon, Sarah organized a public demonstration in Haven Springs Central Plaza. With proper permits secured and safety measures in place, Esperanza would show her method of communication with Libertad to the wider community. The plaza filled quickly with townspeople and visitors drawn by the national coverage. Chairs formed a wide semicircle, leaving a large open space in the center. Sarah addressed the crowd briefly, explaining the scientific principles behind Esperanza's approach. "What you're about to witness isn't magic or a circus trick," she emphasized. "It's interspecies communication based on respect and understanding of trauma response." A hush fell over the gathering as Esperanza entered the plaza, Libertad walking beside her without restraint. The contrast between them was visually striking. The petite young woman in simple jeans and a work shirt, and the massive black Mustang, his coat gleaming in the afternoon sun, moving with powerful grace. Many in the audience gasped. Seeing the famous Mustang up close without fences or barriers made his size and power immediately apparent. Yet he moved with careful precision, maintaining a respectful distance from the onlookers, his attention focused entirely on Esperanza. She began by simply standing still in the center of the space, her posture relaxed but attentive. Libertad circled her once, then stopped several feet away. Without speaking, Esperanza extended her hand, palm down, in a gesture that wasn't reaching but inviting. The Mustang approached slowly, nostrils flaring as he took in her familiar scent. When he lowered his head to meet her hand, a collective sigh rippled through the audience. "Notice that there's no food reward," Sarah narrated quietly. "No treats, no clickers, None of the traditional reinforcement tools. This is communication based on relationship, not conditioning. Esperanza moved through a series of interactions with Libertad, gentle touches along his neck, quiet words in Spanish that only he could hear, moments of stillness where they simply existed in the same space. The Mustang's responses were subtle but unmistakable. The relaxation of muscles previously tensed, the softening in his eyes, the willing movement of his massive body in harmony with her small gestures. When she removed a colorful blanket from a nearby bench and approached him with it, several people instinctively leaned forward in their seats. Placing a foreign object on a formerly wild Mustang's back would typically trigger flight or fight responses. Yet Libertad stood perfectly still as Esperanza draped the blanket across his shoulders, his trust in her overriding his instinctual wariness. The demonstration concluded with something no one expected. Esperanza whispered something to Libertad, then stepped back. The Mustang lowered himself to his knees, then fully to the ground in a position of complete vulnerability, a wild prey animal choosing to lie down in the presence of dozens of potential predators. The crowd's silence deepened, many witnessing something they intuitively recognized as extraordinary, even if they couldn't articulate why. When Libertad rose again at another quiet word from Esperanza, the applause was spontaneous and thunderous. As the formal demonstration ended, families approached cautiously, asking questions. Ethan and Lily Anderson, now local celebrities themselves, were given permission to stroke Libertad's neck under Esperanza's careful supervision. "He remembers you," Esperanza told them softly, as Libertad lowered his head to their level, his ears pricked forward in recognition. Dr. Lisa Anderson watched with professional fascination. "The level of emotional memory displayed is remarkable," she commented to Sarah. "He clearly associates these children with the rescue experience." Throughout the afternoon, community members shared their own stories with Esperanza. Carlos brought 2 other elderly Mexican men who had worked with horses in their youth, their faces lighting up as they recognized techniques their own grandfathers had used. Members of Sarah's Cherokee tribe spoke of traditional horse handling methods that similarly emphasized relationship over dominance. A quiet revolution was occurring in Haven Springs. Marginalized knowledge and approaches, long dismissed as unscientific or primitive, were being recognized for their wisdom and effectiveness. Richard Thornton observed the entire demonstration from the window of the Haven Springs Bank across the street, his expression darkening as he witnessed the groundswell of support. Beside him stood his team of attorneys and public relations consultants, hastily summoned from Denver. "This is getting out of hand," he muttered. "Fix it." The chief attorney, a sharp-featured woman in an expensive suit, studied the scene thoughtfully. "The optics are challenging, Mr. Thornton. Fighting this publicly could damage your business interests beyond Haven Springs. I don't care about optics. That horse is my property." "Which brings me to an uncomfortable truth," the attorney continued. "We've been informed that Ms. Ramirez has filed for a U visa, citing workplace coercion, specifically your threats regarding her immigration status." Thornton's face flushed with anger. "That's absurd. She's illegal. Stating facts isn't coercion." Nevertheless, several witnesses have provided statements confirming these interactions. If this proceeds to a formal investigation, your other labor practices might come under scrutiny. The implications hung heavily in the air. Thornton's businesses, like many in the region, relied heavily on labor practices that might not withstand close examination. As evening fell, the community gathering transformed into an impromptu town celebration. Local musicians set up in the gazebo. Families spread blankets on the grass, and Elena's bakery donated trays of pastries. What had begun as a demonstration became a festival of unity rarely seen in the often divided town. Esperanza sat quietly on a bench at the edge of the plaza, watching as Libertad, now resting in a temporary paddock, received careful attention from Sarah. The day's events had been overwhelming. The public attention, the community support, the legal possibilities opening before her. Jim Blackwood lowered himself onto the bench beside her with a grunt. "You've started something powerful here, young lady." "I didn't mean to start anything," she replied honestly. "I just wanted to help him. The most important changes often begin that way. the retired sheriff said, watching children run past with sparklers in the gathering dusk. Simple acts of compassion that remind us who we could be. The next morning, snow covered the steps of the Eagle County Courthouse where, after weeks of public pressure and tense negotiations, Richard Thornton finally agreed to participate in a public ceremony. The magnate, visibly uncomfortable under the negative spotlight, was flanked by attorneys as the entire community gathered on the courthouse steps. In the center of the square, Libertad waited without restraints beside Esperanza. The contrast between them was poetically powerful. The young immigrant of humble origins and the magnificent black Mustang, united by a bond that no one else fully understood. The snow-covered steps of the Eagle County Courthouse gleamed in the morning light as Richard Thornton, flanked by attorneys in expensive overcoats, ascended toward the makeshift podium. His face remained an impassive mask, though the muscle twitching in his jaw betrayed his discomfort. Weeks of public pressure, boycotts of his business interests, and finally, the threat of a full labor practices investigation had brought the magnate to this moment of calculated surrender. In the center of the courthouse square, Esperanza stood beside Libertad, her simple wool coat and hand-knitted scarf contrasting with the expensive attire of the officials gathering on the steps. The Mustang's breath formed small clouds in the frigid air as he surveyed the crowd with alert, intelligent eyes. His ears flicked occasionally toward unfamiliar sounds, but he showed none of the panic that had once defined him. Months earlier, being surrounded by so many humans would have triggered violent terror. Now he stood calm and dignified, occasionally lowering his head to nudge Esperanza's shoulder gently. "We are gathered today to witness a historic moment for our community," announced Mayor Wilson, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "The official establishment of the Spirit Mountain Wild Horse Sanctuary and the transfer of the Mustang known as Libertad to its permanent care." A ripple of approval moved through the gathered townspeople. Children sat on parents' shoulders for a better view, cameras flashed, and reporters from national networks adjusted their equipment. What had begun as a local controversy had blossomed into a story that captured hearts across the country, a tale of unlikely connection between a marginalized young woman and a traumatized wild horse, culminating in the miraculous rescue of 2 children. Thornton stepped forward, documents clutched in his gloved hand. His voice, when he spoke, carried the brittle edge of forced graciousness. "I sign these papers under protest," he declared coldly. "This animal remains private property and would be better served by professional handlers. However, in the interest of community goodwill." His words were interrupted by a powerful snort from Libertad. The crowd's attention shifted as the massive black Mustang took several deliberate steps forward, his movements fluid and purposeful. Thornton instinctively backed away, a flicker of fear crossing his face as the horse he had once dismissed as merely valuable livestock approached. What happened next drew gasps from the assembled crowd. Libertad stopped, looked toward Esperanza with those extraordinarily expressive eyes, and then, in a gesture that seemed impossible to misinterpret, lowered himself in a perfect bow before her, front leg extended, head dipped in a posture of unmistakable choice. "I think he disagrees with you about who belongs to whom," commented Sarah Littlefeather, loud enough for the microphones to pick up. Laughter rippled through the crowd, transforming the solemn ceremony into something more joyful and authentic. With visible reluctance, Thornton signed the documents and handed them to the mayor. Then, using the momentary confusion as cover, he approached Esperanza, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for her ears. "You think you've won, don't you?" he murmured, his breath visible in the cold air between them. "But I know you're illegal in this country. One word from me—" "About that," interrupted Sarah, appearing suddenly at Esperanza's side with Jim Blackwood. "Esperanza has just filed for a U visa for victims of workplace coercion and exploitation. Witnesses have confirmed your threats to report her to immigration if she didn't comply with your demands. Perhaps you'd like to discuss the implications with your attorneys." The color drained from Thornton's face. Without another word, he turned and strode quickly toward his waiting SUV, his entourage scrambling to keep up. The community's attention had already shifted to the true stars of the day, the young woman and the extraordinary horse who had captured their hearts and changed their town forever. 3 years passed, seasons turning from winter to spring to summer to fall, again and again. The Spirit Mountain Sanctuary flourished under the dedicated care of Sarah Littlefeather and the extraordinary abilities of Esperanza Ramirez. What had begun with a single Mustang had grown into a haven for dozens of rescued equines, horses saved from neglect, abuse, or slaughter. Esperanza, now 22, divided her time between studying veterinary medicine at Colorado State University on a special scholarship and developing her unique rehabilitation method at the sanctuary. The provisional legal status granted by her U-visa application had opened doors that once seemed permanently closed to her. Though the full process would take years, for the first time since crossing the border as a child, she could exist without the constant shadow of deportation hanging over her. On a particularly glorious spring morning, with wildflowers carpeting the meadows and the distant mountains still capped with snow, Esperanza prepared for a special event at the sanctuary. Families with traumatized children, many of them refugees like she had once been, were arriving for the first official session of equine-assisted therapy using the rescued horses. "Are you nervous?" Sarah asked, helping arrange chairs in the small outdoor arena they had built specifically for these sessions. "A little," Esperanza admitted, adjusting the simple name badge on her shirt that read, Esperanza Ramirez, Equine Rehabilitation Specialist. "But Libertad knows what to do. He always does." As if summoned by his name, the magnificent black Mustang appeared on a nearby rise. Now 8 years old, Libertad had matured into his full power. The old scars on his flank remained visible, silver lines against his ebony coat, but they no longer defined him. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of a being who had faced his deepest fears and emerged stronger. Without being called, he trotted down to join Esperanza, nickering softly in greeting. She embraced his powerful neck, whispering words of affection in Spanish that made his ears flick forward attentively. "Ready for more healing today, mi corazón?" she asked softly. Over the past 3 years, what had begun as Esperanza's intuitive approach had been formalized into what was now known nationally as the Ramirez Method, a revolutionary approach to equine rehabilitation based on respect, patience, and understanding of trauma. Ranchers and horse trainers from across the country traveled to Haven Springs to learn techniques that challenged decades of traditional practices based on dominance and force. "What you do isn't magic," a famous Kentucky trainer had told her after observing her work. "It's the most natural thing in the world, but we forgot how to do it." "Mi abuelo said that horses are mirrors," Esperanza had replied. "They only reflect what we are inside." The families began arriving shortly before 10 o'clock. Mothers and fathers with children whose eyes held shadows too deep for their young years. Some were refugees from war zones, others survivors of domestic violence or natural disasters. All carried the invisible weight of experiences that had stolen their sense of safety in the world. Esperanza watched as 8-year-old Ethan and 6-year-old Lily Anderson ran toward her across the grassy expanse. The children whose lives Libertad had helped save had become regular visitors to the sanctuary. Their initial trauma transformed into a passion for helping other children heal. "Esperanza!" Lily called, her voice bright with excitement. Now 9 years old, she showed no traces of the hypothermia that had nearly claimed her life 3 years earlier. "Can we help with the new children today?" "Of course, mi amor," Esperanza replied, embracing both children warmly. "You two are our best assistants." "Where's Libertad?" Ethan asked, scanning the paddock. As if summoned by the question, the powerful Mustang appeared at the fence line, his ears pricked forward in recognition of the children. Over the years, he had developed a special relationship with them, as if their shared experience in the storm had created a bond that transcended ordinary understanding. Among the families arriving that morning, Esperanza noticed a girl of about 10, hanging back behind her mother, her thin shoulders hunched defensively. The child's eyes darted nervously around the unfamiliar environment, widening with apprehension at the sight of the horses. In that guarded posture, that vigilant gaze, Esperanza recognized the same fear she had seen in Libertad years before, the universal language of trauma that crossed boundaries of species and circumstance. Esperanza approached slowly, crouching down to meet the girl at eye level. "Hello," she said gently in English, then repeated in Spanish. "Me llamo Esperanza, and this is my friend Libertad." The girl glanced timidly at the imposing black horse, who had approached the fence with surprising gentleness, lowering his head to the child's level and blowing softly through his nostrils. "He was like you once," Esperanza continued softly, scared, hurt, thinking he would never trust anyone again. "What happened to him?" the girl asked, her voice barely audible. Esperanza smiled, glancing up at the vast Colorado sky that she now considered home. The same sky that had witnessed her crossing the border as a frightened child, that had seen her grief and loneliness, that had watched as she found her purpose in the most unexpected of places. "We found each other," she answered simply, "and we discovered that scars don't disappear, but they can make us stronger when we don't have to carry them alone." In the distance, across the sanctuary's open meadows, other rescued horses grazed peacefully. Above, an eagle traced circles in the infinite sky. And there, in the heart of Haven Springs, two spirits once broken continued their journey of healing, not just for themselves, but for all those who, like them, needed to believe that after trauma, trust and love were possible again. Esperanza and Libertad, no longer an undocumented girl and a condemned wild Mustang, but partners, healers, and living proof that the most damaged souls often possess the greatest capacity for compassion and healing.